Well, this should be where we left off, or thereabouts. I finally figured that out. Look back at the last recording, right? Okay. I learned. So we're going to continue with this till we get done with the thermal processing or meat-like flavors. And then we're going to go back to the dairy enzyme-modified products and go have a run through that. I got through half of the exams, and that's as far as I got. I will get through the other half, but anyway, you won't get them tonight, I'm afraid. Do you have any? Oh, and there is a lab for those of you who want to go tonight. We've got 4 different things set up. We'll have encapsulation using beta-cyclodextrins, spray drying and spray chilling, microfluidics, and plating. There we go. On silica and on sugar. So there will be 4 different stations that will just kind of rotate through. Like I say, something like 40, 45 minutes. I'm hoping we kind of get around the circle. So anyway, we will go for that. Do you have any questions before we start today? Okay. Well, good. So when we were talking about, we could call them process flavors. That's a very broad term. You used to call them reaction flavors, but that was not a good consumer image. And they thought people process foods. Yes, we process foods all the time. So we'll call them process flavors from now on instead of reaction flavors. And of course, processing doesn't have a great image with the consumer either, but it might be better than reaction in one way or another. So anyway, we've been spending our time with meat flavors, and that's by far the biggest market. But we'll also spend a little bit of time with chocolate as well, kind of at the end of this topic. So let's go ahead and do that. And so we'd spend some time talking about the Maillard reaction. That is a very important reaction for us. But there are other things that go into this process once we start making a meat-like flavor out of it. And so the idea, yes, we do use free amino acids, and they are what gives us the character, the species character. Well, not the species character, but kind of the meat-like backbone. We've talked a good deal about how the Maillard reaction works with amino acids. But we also then work in hydrolyzed vegetable proteins or hydrolyzed plant proteins. And again, in that same category, just like HVPs, HPPs, autolyzed yeast fits into that same grouping in a sense. They tend to provide some of the same materials. And we look at what comes out of these Maillard reactions, other reactions. We get Strecker aldehydes. Whenever you look at the Maillard reaction, Browning reaction for meats or for any other product, we see big peaks, a lot of Strecker aldehydes. They're basically amino acid that's been stripped of the amine function and the acid function. That's just how the chemical reaction works. These 2 groups get torn off, and we end up with an aldehyde that's called a Strecker aldehyde. They make a contribution, but they really aren't major contributors to the flavors threshold or sensory properties. And so what we find is really more important is when we start getting down this Maillard reaction product. So we busted this whole thing into little bits and pieces, sugars, amino acids, and those then tend to recombine. They recombine into things that are much more important, such as 2-methylfurandiol. That is meat-like, a very meat-like character. And that wasn't discovered that long ago, but at the time it was discovered and being made at something like $1,000 per gram. So, okay, it was on the expensive side. Needless to say, it's come down some so we can use it. But the sensory threshold is amazing, too. low parts per billion, parts per trillion. So it really didn't take a great deal to carry the flavor. So we get some compounds up here that tend to round out, fill in the flavor, but our important ones are the secondary products that come out of that reaction. Sulfur is very critical to forming meat-like flavors. We need sulfur. Where does that sulfur come from? It comes from cysteine, cystine, thiamine hydrochloride. You can even do it with hydrogen sulfide for that matter. We just want a good source of reactive sulfur. People really don't want to work with hydrogen sulfide. It's extremely toxic. It's a gas, and so it's hard to contain, hard to work with. So when we start making these meat-like flavors, we really work with cysteine, cystine primarily. Thiamine, I think I mentioned thiamine itself, and you can get a meat-like flavor, but it's a vitamin. And there are different requirements for putting vitamins into food. So our workhorses tend to be cysteine, cystine. Thymine, taurine are basically thrown in sometimes into this pot. The thymine gives us, I could ask you, I suppose, potato flavor. That's what it gives. I mentioned that the other day, actually. The thymine now comes from thymine. And that gives it kind of a vegetable note, a potato note. So taurine is said to give you a little bit of a pork character. So if you throw a little bit of taurine in the pot, start heating, you'll get more towards the pork. There are other sources that show up in the patent literature, methylphenol, dimethyl sulfide. You'll find them in the patent literature, but generally they're not natural. If they're not natural, you can't call the product that's formed natural. That's one of the rules. If you start with natural ingredients and you heat it naturally, okay, we'll let that go. You end up with a natural flavor. But again, you couldn't put these materials in. Oh, there is another thing up here too. Thiamine is not formed in a natural process. And so that's another reason why it's a bit of a problem to use. Okay, I was going to say, where did it go? HVPs. And again, we've said something about HVPs already, hydrolyzed plant proteins, or either hydrolyzed plant or hydrolyzed vegetable proteins. And again, you get quite a number of these from different sources, whether it's wheat, soy, corn, other grains. A lot of variety. They just basically bring a lot of free amino acids into the pot, short-chain peptides. It's interesting that this is done under a very low pH. So it's a very, very strong acid. And in the end, you can't sell that strong acid. You want to neutralize it so it's more easily used in food products. And so, but you neutralize it with sodium hydroxide, so you've got HCl. And that, of course, puts together the sodium plus salt. And so these things will run up to 45% salt. So if you buy an HVP or a hydrolyzed plant protein, it can be 45% salt. At a time we're looking at maybe salt reduction, sodium reduction, that's not necessarily a popular thing. Why are some of these so effective? They can be up to 18% MSG, monosodium glutamate. What a wonderful enhancer. So where's this enhancement coming from? Some reaction could also be bringing a source of monosodium glutamate in. I think I've mentioned this. I forget what I mentioned because I lecture at different places. But there are, I'll repeat myself just in case. Again, for hydrolysis of these materials, there is a concern for carcinogens that are formed during the process. And that's resulted in there being some desire, some efforts to try and do HVPs by enzyme hydrolysis, not just acid hydrolysis. So acids, we tend to get hydroxypropyl. It's carcinogen. Here, we're looking at doing it by enzymes. So we don't get the carcinogens formed, but don't have to worry about it. And so, problem is that you can do this by enzymatic hydrolysis, but you don't get the same product. You don't get the same effect. You don't get the 18% monosodium glutamate, for example. You get some peptides, short peptides are not nearly as effective. So we can make HVPs by enzymes, but they're not very useful to us. They're not nearly as useful as are the acid hydrolyzed products. And Again, what I've said before, I'm not sure. Historically, when these were made, they were based on hydrolyzed vegetable proteins. And so that's what was delivered to the customer. That's what the customers tended to accept as meat flavor. Kind of like diacetyl. Diacetyl isn't in butter. There's very little diacetyl in butter. It's not butter. But again, everybody, when they smell diacetyl, they say butter because it comes in microwave popcorn, right? It's buttered microwave popcorn. So, okay, butter is diacetyl. And this is exactly the same thing here. All of these meat-like flavors, high levels of HVPs, and people recognize HVP as meat flavor, so it's kind of crazy. So again, this is a real challenge when the manufacturer said, you know, we want to get rid of monosodium glutamate, we want to get rid of salt, and those are the things that make it taste like it does. And so we've done a fair amount of tasting of these things in the short course that we've offered. And we'll have a company's, you know, normal, full, whatever, meat-like flavors, and then without any HVP, without any salt, and nobody would buy the other two. And nobody would absolutely buy the other two. They don't resemble the product in any way. They're based on HVP and salt.
Are these products meat products, or are they like artificial, like meats, like told?
Well, they're real foods.
Well, but are they?
That was kind of cheap, I hope.
I guess what I'm asking is this what like vegetarians consider meat flavor, or is it like meat flavor compared to actual meat?
It's used in gravies and sauces that are meat gravies and sauces, frozen foods that have a gravy on them, dry mixes. You go through all kinds of dry mixes. And they're based on these types of flavors, and they're meat flavors. So they're not aimed at being, you know, a plant, something to flavor plants with, or, you know, they're used for that, but that wasn't their goal.
I guess I'm curious just how much like the meat target has changed with like the push for like finding like meat substitutes that are like acceptable to not only like vegetarians but also to.
Well, sure. I mean, but that's always been the goal. You know, the goal's always been to make it taste more like meat. And they're doing a better and better job with it, mainly because they're finding ways to top note it. In other words, finding some chemicals that are natural. It's a silly game, absolutely silly game. But okay, they're looking for 2-methyl-3-furanthile, right? If they can form that in a natural way, oh, that's wonderful. And a little bit later, you see something about chicken. Oh gosh, this chemical is chicken. They can make it naturally. So they're getting more sophisticated. They're getting better quality over time. But it's not because they've changed the laws of nature that they aren't programming. They found ways to make flavor chemicals that are reminiscent of meat. Autolyzed yeast extracts, like I say, either HVPs or AYEs, autolyzed yeast extracts. Again, they can contribute flavor enhancers. In addition to the monosodium glutamate and small peptides, autolyzed yeast extracts also contain the 5' nucleotides. So there are two groups of flavor enhancers, right? There's basically the monosodium glutamate and the 5' nucleotides, inosine monophosphate, guanosine monophosphate. We'll probably spend a little more time talking about them later on, not today. So autolyzed yeast does offer something else. And these 5' nucleotides really work synergistically with monosodium glutamate. So together, they're a little more powerful, they're a little better quality. So very commonly, you'll see HVPs and autolyzed yeast kind of round it out and get more complete flavor. And some you have to enhance by heating. By some, I'm talking about these autolyzed yeast extracts. You look at the companies that produce these products. For a long time, they just simply sold them to the flavor industry. The flavor industry would heat them, do all the magic to it. Now they're starting to make their own. So the yeast companies are producing yeast, producing autolyzed yeast, but they're heating them, putting a little sugar in there, getting, so they're selling you a little bit more than just the hydrolyzed yeast. They're selling you somewhat or a step towards a meat flavor. And the idea is value added, right? They can charge you more for it. And so they make more money in the process. Why would you ever add protein to this pot or this reaction vessel? Well, as I said, if you have any meat extracts come from the corned beef process or any way you're processing meats, you've got some meat extract left over, you can put it in the pot, then you can say meat on your label. So it looks good. Does it do anything for you? Probably not, but it looks good. It looks good on the label. Gelatin is sometimes put in to your pot. Again, you're going to be forming this flavor, and that's primarily the body mouth feeling, so mouth fullness. It doesn't really give you flavor per se, but it does give you a different perception, a richer, more full perception. Is it reactant? Probably not. It's primarily adding this component to the flavor. In terms of sugars that go in that pot, most commonly glucose or fructose. They're cheap, they're readily available, they work fine. Xylose and ribose are 5-carbon sugars. They react faster. We get the flavor formed a little faster, and there's less time in the pot, less time heating your reaction mixture if you use ribose or xylose. The main reaction is much faster with 5-carbon sugars than it is with 6-carbon sugars. So the same thing here. Does it make a better flavor? Not really. It just makes it a little quicker. So it's a matter of cost versus flavor you get. Some patents show ribose 5-phosphate, all kinds of hydrolyzed polysaccharides, yeast and palisade. You can even use pure chemicals again here as the carbonyl compound that react with your amino acids. You can put propanol in the pot. Forget the sugar. You want something that's going to chemically react with that sugar, break it down. And the same for diacetyl, extremely reactive. But of course, you don't want any leftover diacetyl. You don't want any leftover propanol. And again, would these be called natural? Well, depends on where they got these from. And so, no, ribose 5-phosphate, altogether too expensive. And so when you look at a patent like that that's based on ribose when there's no source, forget it. So what other sugars do we use? Glucose, fructose, maybe a little bit of xylose. It's a little more, speeds the reaction up to some extent. We want to have a pH, if you're going to do meat, of 5.2, 5.3, whatever meat is, it's in that ballpark. And so it makes sense that you carry this reaction out at the same pH that your meat is when you're heating meat and forming meat flavor. And so there will be some acid added to that pot to bring the pH down to 5.2 or 5.3. And again, we look through patent literature, citric acid, lactic acid, acidic, propionic, amylic. There's really quite a variety of acids. But they all work the same. If they bring the pH down to 5.2, 5.3, they're good. But the difference comes if we think about lactic. Lactic has a flavor of its own. And so you might want to use lactic acid if you're using a dairy cream. You're going to make a cream gravy that's based on milk. It goes into a stroganoff or something along those lines. So you're putting a little bit of lactic acid in there would tend to drive that flavor a little bit more towards the dairy base. If you look at acetic acid, there's this character of that. Do you want that? No. So the acids will be chosen that'll push the flavor a little bit one direction or another. They all do exactly the same thing. They get the pH down where you want it for everything else to react. We could use hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid. They're nice and clean. They give you, no hint or no nuance of flavors you find up here. But we tend to use these much more so. So drop the pH, and most commonly it's done with organic acids. Fats, I think I mentioned that it's there. 4 tends to be there to give you more of the species character. Whatever characterizes that species, what makes mutton taste different than beef, taste different than pork, taste different than chicken. those things tend to come from the fat, the lipid in the animal. And so if you want to make it push it one direction or another, put a little bit of pork fat in that pot as well, or a little bit of mutton tallow, a little bit of fish oil, a little bit of chicken fat, and then go ahead and do your heating on it. And so you can then drive that reaction mixture towards a certain type of meat. So the fat type determines the character of that meat process. There's you can work with the fat before the reaction, so it goes through the reaction with the rest of them, or you can add it after. And to some extent, there's a little bit of a benefit to heating it separately. So add a heated fat after you've done your processed flavors. You add the two together. And the advantage of that is that if you put these fats in your amino acids, your sugars, your acids, and things like this, well, then you don't have much control. You're trying to control the beta reaction and how it goes. And you're trying to control fat degradation, which might be a different reaction. So if you do them separately, you heat all of your amino acid sugars together in one pot, and then take your fat and optimize that to drive it to the flavor you want, and then mix the two together at the end. You're a little bit ahead of the game by heating them separately. You have better control than two different reactions. So oftentimes that fat source does come from an animal. The problem is that flavor companies are not meat processing companies. And so you need to get the U.S. Department of Agriculture now into your chemical processing area. If you're taking raw meat, you're taking any raw animal products in, you have to be inspected by the USDA. And so you've got to keep things isolated, so raw meat's on one side, processed, or, fat on one side, and fat on the other side. And so flavor companies really don't like to use fats, but they have to some extent. But it's always a challenge how they deal with an animal product in this chemical environment. There's a little bit of work in patent literature saying lard will tend to enhance your chicken milk. It's palmitic acid, gives you a little more roast pork, oleic acid, a little bit of a mutton character. So you put the fat in, and you may add some other notes to it as well. You don't like to use fat, saying you typically have to use fat. You don't like it for other reasons as well. The first is, you don't want to be a USDA inspected plant. But you start putting fat into the system, it doesn't spray dry well. So fat gets to be a little bit of a problem because it tends to be sticky inside the spray dryer. If you got some fat in there, you pack it up and you can put it out on the shelf someplace. No problem with oxidation. If you put it in a finished product, you put water with it, and it looks really nice, and then you start getting this oil scum on top, slick on top of the product. It isn't so as attractive either. So, it's a little bit of a catch-22. You need the fat, but it's a pain in the butt to work with in one way or another. Meat does have a water continuous phase. It's a high water activity, so again, you carry your reaction out. Needless pod have a water activity similar to that of meat, so it's starting near 1. And so, water is your solvent for this reaction vessel. There are patent examples for alcohol, propylene glycol, and glycerol. If you would use either, especially propylene glycol, it would give you a lower water activity, which is attractive for something like a cocoa bean. If you want to reproduce a chocolate flavor, cocoa beans, are they wet or are they dry? They're dry when they're roasted. And so, in that way, you probably want to use propylene glycol for a chocolate flavor, but you probably ought to use water just to get that water activity up for the Maillard reaction to go the right direction. So, again, different solvents are published, but again, really water is the material or the solvent to use. Next one is ingredients. Sure, adding salt to the mixture if you need to. Depends on how much HPP you put in there. You might have enough already. Preservatives, what you want to do is put antioxidants. Okay, well, let's preserve that fat that we use in our reaction mixture. Somebody may want to use this as a gravy, and then they actually want to put some starch in, or some thickener in the system as well. You might want to have that fat not separate, and so there may be some lecithin, monoglycerides, or some emulsifiers put into the pot. You may want a ham, a smoked ham, or smoked beef, smoked whatever. And so you go to one of the smoke suppliers, flavored smokes, and you simply put that into the mixture at the end. Flavor enhancers, you probably got enough, but you could add more. Colorants, you want more color to it, you might add some color. If you try to dry this, it's an absolute mess. It is an absolute mess. It is sticky, it's hygroscopic. You run it through a spray dryer, you fill the inside of the spray dryer with this wet, sticky mess. And so you can really do no better than 50% maltodextrin. Half of the solid, so you've got your reaction mixture, you've got this pot, you just heat it up. You're going to add an equal amount of solid, some maltodextrin to it. Maltodextrin dries easily, and so by putting maltodextrin in, you can actually get it through a spray dryer. The other choice that comes up in another slide is that you don't necessarily have to spray dry, but if you want to spray dry the material, you just need some help with it. They put in silicates. What's that? A free-flowing agent? It'll dry a little better. It'll flow out of the bag if you want to. And then here's our top coating. So this is when we're basically all done with the finished product. We start looking at adding top notes to it. In terms of temperature, when we got again everything in our pot, we can legally do anything from 100 degrees centigrade to 180 degrees centigrade. That's permitted by law. We can't do lower than 100. We can't do over 180. And so, and our time also must be anywhere from 0.25. You can probably go for longer than 4 hours, but you can't go less than 0.25 hours. Again, by law, by regulation. And so you have to work within these limits. If you're doing something at 100 to 105 degrees, so we're on the low end of this, we don't need a pressure vessel for that. So we can heat this mess at ambient pressure, and it reduce your costs and equipment. You start having to do this in pressure vessels, it gets to be an expensive process too. So low temperature, don't need a pressure vessel to do it. It's attractive. I hope on another slide I'll say, but that doesn't work for roasted meats. It works for stewed meats. Low temperature, you get stewed character. High temperature, you get roasted character. So if you want kind of a stewed chicken, okay, it works. But if you want a roasted chicken, you're going to have to jack it up and get on the higher. Not up in this range. You end up with a lot of carbon in it, so you're more in the middle of that range. High temperature, yep. Then you would use some kind of pressure vessel of one kind or another. So there's obviously a cost advantage between the two of them. But again, which one gives you the flavor that you want? Because you can't get a roasted flavor, like I say, by heating at 100 degrees centigrade. I don't know how many days no matter how many days you heat it at 100, it doesn't get roasted. It just doesn't go that way. So you basically have to go ahead and oftentimes use higher pressures, higher temperatures. And very commonly, you want to work at 15 psi. At 15 psi pressure, it's a very standard pressure, 121 degrees centigrade. Why do you want to not go over that? Because 121 usually gets you what you want. And so if you can get it faster at higher temperatures. But this is the point, is that pressure is what common companies, steam fitters, they work with. If they work with 15 psi, it's not overly expensive. There's a lot of people can do it. You start saying, I want to work under really high pressure. It's much more expensive for equipment, much more expensive for people. It's a very expensive way to go. So again, normally you'll work someplace between 0 or 15. So you tend to work on those two ranges. Roasted, stewed, comes out of it. If you like the idea of doing some experimentation on it, small samples, again, there's a nice par reactor that's set up, so we got 6 of these. different pressure vessels, put 6 different formulations. If you temperature program them, you can come up with 6 different formulations. You can smell, taste, and work with. An awful lot easier. It can be done with a home pressure cooker, yep, as it is in many cases. But again, if you've got something like this, it's much better temperature control. And you get a lot more data out of it, obviously. Again, this is a typical pressure vessel. It's a pretty decent heavy-duty stainless steel. Lots of nice bolts holding the cap on, a good tight lid. So you can manage to do things in that kind of a vessel for 15 psi. In terms of processing, you can turn out either a paste or you can turn out a dry powder. So you can sell it as a paste. It comes out of there. It's fairly viscous. You don't have a lot of water in it. But it's, I call it an ugly product. It is really an ugly product. But it tends to separate into different phases. So you'll have, a black front at the bottom. You'll have some liquid center in the middle. You'll have some fat on the top. It works as a paste, but it's not a nice uniform product. Most people do prefer a dry flavoring. Again, if you're going to put a dry mix, it has to be a dry flavoring. And so it's going to end up being dried by either one of 2 processes. It's going to be produced by drying, spray drying. So you can get a powder out of it. Like I say, add a little maltodextrin to it, go ahead and spray dry it. And so you can have a spray dried powder. It's interesting that actually you can do vacuum hand drying of this. And you actually get some chemical reaction occurring in it. The first time I looked at that, I said, what are they doing? That doesn't make sense. Spray drying is really a good way to trap flavors inside of a product. Why do you want to pour them in a pan and, like put it in the oven? That seems like a horrible way to do this. Keep flavors inside. But actually, what you do is you get some additional reaction, and it turns out pretty well. So this goes against conventional thinking. Great way to trap flavors and maintain them. This doesn't seem to be good at all. Lots of surface area, a long time, but it actually makes a good product. So it's interesting. Managing, okay, extremely hygroscopic. They are hygroscopic. And that's one of the questions I get fairly often. I'm making this wonderful meat-like flavor. I'm shipping it to Malaysia, and it always comes in as a solid block. It's caked. It just picks up moisture, and you got to chip it out of the box. And not a good solution. And so, very commonly, people will put silica in there. And it's interesting to think about silica. It's a free-flowing agent, right? It's a drying agent. But it doesn't do much except preferentially absorb water. So if you got your package, and the package is somewhat permeable to water vapor, the water vapor is going to come in, it's going to go into the silica, that's fine. But pretty quick the silica is filled, now your product cakes. Some people think that if you put silica in, you're stopping it caking. No. You're just absorbing water up to a point. When the silica gets done, it's going to form a rock again. So it's got its limitations. So you need to look at packaging. It has to be packaged properly. And in terms of packaging, you're concerned about moisture migration. So a good moisture barrier and perhaps using some silica in the process. But it takes a combination to deliver a product in a humid environment. Like I say, top noting, it could be done at the end of the reaction process. You'd never add these expensive chemicals to the beginning of the process. They'd get changed in the process and probably wouldn't be so useful to you. And so you could certainly add them at the end of the process or as a dry blend. So you get a spray dried flavor, top note, and mix that with your product. And so the flavoring, this top noting, can be done to support the basic meat flavor, such as the 2-methyl 3,5-butane, BT is the best description of that, or try isobutyl 5,6-dihydroforage, I-5. These are reinforcing the meat flavor. But again, if you want a certain other character to it, you can add a chemical that brings it in a certain direction. So is it reinforcing meat, or is it driving meat to chicken meat, or to pork, or to some other meat, or smoke meat? So the top note either to reinforce the basic flavor, or to drive character in some direction. There's lots of trial and many errors, like most things in life. You work with all the variables within the legal guidelines and cost restriction. You could do many things if cost wasn't an issue, but cost is always an issue. And so you basically take what you learned, you read the literature, and you start trying it. Okay, I'll try this. No, that didn't work. No, that didn't work. And keep on going down the process. And the idea that, a small change in formulation can really change, big change in flavor character. Remember, flavor being is place in time. It's a balance of all these chemicals. And if it isn't the right balance, you don't get the flavor that you want. I was promoting for some time, and maybe that comes up in the last slide, so maybe we won't go here yet. No. Okay. Well, we'll come back to this general idea of experimentation at the end. Yep.
So, for a lot of the sources for meat flavors are a product of other reactions, right? Does that make them more stable since they have been a product of very large reactions? Does that make them more stable?
Not necessarily, because they may well be chemically reactive with everything else that you put in your product, whether it's a gravy, all kinds of starch, so whatever. So not necessarily. So you can create them, but you can destroy them too. They can go away. You might think that they're actually bulletproof, so to speak, if they've been heated to 130, but no, they're just as prone. This is just a little bit about chocolate. At one point, chocolate or cocoa was expensive. Still is, I guess. But it really motivated people to start saying, okay, we can do some meats. Can we now do chocolate? Can we do something similar with that? And they basically started off doing things somewhat the same way, doing a lot of flavor isolation, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and saying, these chemicals, we've identified them. They're certainly important to meat or to cocoa flavor, chocolate flavor. How do we get these things? And so again, most of them are products of the Maillard reaction. There's very few that aren't products of the Maillard reaction. So we're looking at basically the same type of reaction for cocoa as we are for meat. And they're very, very different products. And so when they started, doing this work on identifying compounds, they thought, well, gosh, we'll try to reproduce this. We'll get those compounds, put them together, artificial, synthetic, whatever, a lot of great chocolate. It really didn't work that way. If we go back to get processed flavors, but let's go ahead and use the Maillard reaction to get them, rather than think we're going to create those synthetic chemicals or natural forms of those synthetic chemicals. So, yep. The same type of process is used for chocolate flavor, cocoa flavor, we should say. This is a fellow that I happen to like, George Rizzi. He was with Procter and Gamble, and he did a nice piece of work that I'm going to go through about how he chose to enhance cocoa or chocolate flavor. And so what he did, and there's a good logic to this, I like it. So what you find is if you take cocoa beans and you grind the cocoa beans, you extract them with water, you filter out the lumps, and you're left with an aqueous solution. And if you take that aqueous solution and dry it and then roast it, you get chocolate. Okay. So that's kind of a guideline. That, okay, whatever is needed to form cocoa flavor is in that water-soluble extract. So fat isn't important. There's no fat in that water-soluble extract. So everything you want happens to be in that water-soluble extract. And so then the next thing he did is did LCMS and identified the amino acids, identified sugars, catechin, theobromine, and caffeine. And that's basically what comprised that water extract. So now you know what compounds, ingredients are needed to form this flavor on heating. So, okay, what he did is freeze-dried the product, this water extract, adjusted it to different water activities, and then heated them, and looked for aroma. The one that was so that's the Bahia, that's the cocoa bean. He also looked at Donna Riva Sanchez, but anyway, so the Bahia bean, very good quality bean. So water activity is 0, roasted it under normal cocoa bean roasting temperatures, and got a nice strong chocolate aroma to it. At 0.13, still a nice strong chocolate aroma. 0.53 weak, 0.75 weak in musting. So again, the water activity was extremely important in channeling that Maillard reaction in going the right direction to develop a cocoa flavor. So he knows he's got the ingredients here. He's identified those ingredients. He said, okay, under this temperature and this water activity and time of heating, I can get a chocolate flavor. What's what?
It's the RBI.
Oh, good. The same as above.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm laughing because I suppose I should have just put strong chocolate, because if you're in a different class and you're going through something, is that IBIT or is that some other chemical you don't know? Yeah. And so then the next thing.
so you said that was the extract of the beans. So what are the different water activities supposed to represent? The extract's water activity?
No, so it's freeze dried, so it's
yeah,
nice and
freeze
dry, and then it's adjusted for water activity. So you need to know the right temperature, water activity, time for heating, because now he's going to start heating this thing apart. So we've got this complex mixture in this aqueous phase. Okay, what in that aqueous phase is important? So we had to have somebody to know how to heat it. Okay, so if you got all of them together, it gives you cocoa. So he basically then took the entire extract and heated that extract, so the dried material. And did he add anything to it? Did he add sugar to that aqueous extract? Anything else? No, he didn't. It formed a cocoa or chocolate aroma. So he knows he has everything there that he needs to do this. And then he did ion exchange. And the ion exchange would take out the amino acids. So you could run it through, all sugars and a catechin, whatever else would be left to test. And in this case, so this took basically off the sugars. I'm sorry, this takes off the amino acids. If he takes off the amino acids and he doesn't add reducing sugar, does he get a chocolate flavor? No. If he adds reducing sugar, he does get a cocoa flavor. So what you can basically go ahead and say is that this material, when adding sugar to it, does generate the flavor. So whatever this is, it's important to him. Then went through other processes, one of them where you took out the amino acids, and whether you added sugar or not, did get any flavor. You could come down to the point where you could identify what is really necessary in here to build a cocoa flavor. And so he ended up, not ended up, but at that point he had 16 components he identified. But it proved that amino acids were there. It proved you needed reducing sugars to be there to form the right flavor. So he had 16 components. He went through and did some studies with them and said, can I eliminate some of them? Are they really necessary? He did, and then narrowed his model system down to 9 components. So with these 4 amino acids, tyrosine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, and leucine, if those were the amino acids in this proportion, that's what they were in the bean, the cocoa bean. Okay, that's what he wants. And so in these proportions, he got the flavor he wanted on heating. If you look at The other components, the sugars in there, we need amino acids, we need sugars. And so, again, you looked at what was in the cocoa bean. There are 27% of the cocoa bean solubles is fructose, 5.4 glucose, 8.3 sucrose. So that's basically the formulation. So there's a formulation of amino acids based on what's in the bean, formulation based on sugars in the bean. They said, well, we want a little bitterness to this. So there was caffeine theobromine there as well. Added that to the mixture. And basically came up with formulation. So that's another way to do it. Basically, how do you determine what's important? And so 9-component system, heated 120 to 130 degrees centigrade, made him a chocolate or cocoa flavor. So I guess that's just a systematic approach. How do you figure out what you might use and what kind of conditions do you need for that? The idea, if you want a little more bitterness to that tannic acid, if you want to have a low water activity, cocoa beans are dry when you roast them. They're not going to give you cocoa flavor if they're wet. We saw that also from the model system. So, but you want some solvent in there so the ingredients can get together and chemically react. So he used both propylene glycol as the solvent instead of water. For meats, we used water. Meats are wet, so water is a great matrix for that. But for cocoa beans, they're dry, so we'll use a solvent as a low water activity. And vanilla is essential to chocolate too. It's interesting. That's a complete digression. But the chocolate, you can label chocolate you can put artificial synthetic vanilla in chocolate, and you don't have to label it as artificially flavored. But if you take that vanilla out, it is not chocolate. And it's interesting, totally digression from the logic. But I was always fascinated when you go through labeling, which we will. Why on earth can you put a synthetic compound in there and not put artificially labeled across the continent? The chocolate manufacturers did a lot of lobbying with the government, and they convinced the government that vanilla wasn't chocolate, therefore they can put synthetic in it. Twice they told it over. But we'll come back to that. So that was really a reasonable study. In the end, like I say, he added vanilla to it just because if you taste it, chocolate without vanilla, it isn't chocolate. So added some vanilla and really came up with something that was fairly reasonable. There's been lots of other things done. We won't spend much time with this, but again, in this particular study, they were interested in enhancing the chocolate flavor. And so they mixed up some nice reactants, put them in fat mixture and sprayed the beans with them, and then roasted the beans. So you put the precursors on the surface of the beans, roasted the beans. Guess what? There's more chocolate flavor. Seems kind of strange. The interesting thing that I find is that almost all of the companies that are doing these products, they take a single dimension. They simply do this trial and error, and they don't really put them together in a sense. The idea of using chemometrics or experimental designs, they don't do much of that. If they do it, it tends to be more, here's a set of experiments, what if we learn another set of experiments? And what I've been pushing for companies that work in this area is to take all of their information and go ahead and put it into chemometrics and start saying, what this flopped, what was its character? Oh, this really wasn't what I was going for, but it did have kind of a raw, meaty taste that I like. But they tend to lose that. And if they were actually monitoring this, putting it into spreadsheets, putting it into chemometrics, they'd say, well, I got a bloody flavor here. I want it over there. What did I do here? That tends to be lost in the industry, which is a little bit of a frustration. Let me see where I was going with that. I wanted to, and we can skip those other ones, you can scratch them out, is that when something fails, you'll still always learn. And so I like the idea of doing a little better job of looking after this information, doing sensory analysis on all of the samples that you do, build databases to put them together, look for what conditions result in what notes. Because right now, oftentimes, there's some one person or a small group of people that have done enough of this to be pretty good at it. But then when they leave, it's lost. And when something failed, there might have been some really good information in there, and it doesn't get recovered as it is. So maybe, again, that's not important to you in terms of this class, but if you're ever in the business of doing process flavors, reaction flavors, you know, the whole idea of putting in a much better data set, keeping track of things, is really a good way to go. Well, that's that. We could actually take a break early. How about that? Then we're going to go back one to the dairy flavors. So let's take a 10-minute break now. Okay. Okay. So, again, you've had first choice come in, and I wasn't here, so I don't know how redundant this is going to be. So we'll see with that. We'll talk about enzyme modified dairy products. Why do we do enzyme modified dairy products? Basically, problems with using natural products, dairy products. What are the problems with that? And it really gets into the idea that dairy products are expensive ingredients, and to be using them and using them in quantity is really costly. So can we give more flavor to the product? Can we have lower usage levels? Does that reduce our costs? Because again, these materials typically don't have a strong flavor. They're fairly subtle flavors. And sometimes, again, we may want to use the dairy product because of the fat or protein content. We want that character, but we may not want that ingredient to be a major part of the product that we're making. So there is a motivation to try and intensify dairy products for cost or potentially functionality. And so basically, we start looking for alternatives. How can we develop dairy-like flavors? And so there's really a problem with making, again, these chemicals entirely. We don't have the natural compounds to make a dairy product. If we had all the natural chemicals, we could mix them together, we could make a cheese. We can make a cream flavor, whatever else. But we need to know what chemicals we need. We need to know the proportions, and we need to be able to get them. So we want a natural label. How do we tend to do that? It's tough to do it by formulation. And so we also want to say dairy products on the label. That looks much better to have, milk, butter, cream, and cheese instead of, naturally flavored or that. So anyway, there's a kind of a logic that comes into the image, how you label products as attractive. If you could actually take a dairy product and make it stronger in flavor, get a little more mileage out of it. So labeling cost looks good. And again, like all the other things that we talk about, basically, how do we go about making a dairy product stronger in flavor? We study nature. Where does flavor come from? What are the pathways that led to that flavor? And so, again, how does nature do it? Let's try to enhance that. Let's start trying to make that happen a little more readily in greater quantities. And so there's been a lot of studies looking at compounds, looking at pathways. How does flavor get developed? And we won't stick with cheeses, but that's certainly an example, an awful lot of work on cheese flavor. If we look at sources of milk for dairy products, cow, sheep, goat are the major sources. In the U.S., of course, cow is much more important. In many other parts of the world, both sheep's milk and goat's milk are more common. But for us, yeah, we tend to look for cow's milk. And so again, looking at nature, what do we have? And you can kind of go through that process. Typically, we'll start with milk, obviously. Pick your animal, pasteurize, heat treat it, add a lactic acid culture, and ultimately a coagulant or a rennet. So again, how many of you made cheese? Not everybody, a few. So the process is simple. Yeah, you take milk, and like I say, you'll typically pasteurize it. You don't have to, but in the U.S., there's certain advantages to it. And then you put in, warm it up to nice temperature for the lactic acid bacteria. You inoculate it with the bacteria. You let those bacteria grow to a certain point. You monitor the pH of the milk. Gets to a certain point, you add rennet. It forms a clot. You basically take that clot. And so the clotted, now cut up or cubed, and those stirring and heating. So by cooking, I don't mean they're boiling it. They're bringing down maybe 110 degrees, something like that Fahrenheit. So it isn't being cooked really, but you're basically raising the temperature. And so those cheese curds, as you tend to be cooking and warming it, they tend to lose moisture. So pretty quick, you've got curds floating around or settling out in this big vat of warm, de-cheesed milk. How's that for a way to put it? Your curds tend to then be collected. And so you can take those curds, that's one part of it. That's the protein portion, and of course some trapped fat. And whey. So we talk about curds and whey. Whey is the liquid. That is the whey proteins. It's mostly sugar. There's any salts that are in it as well. And here's our curd over here. So that's what we want to make our cheese out of. So further process, we typically want that curd to lose more moisture. Add salt and basically do some aging to it. And that gives us cheese. In terms of the whey, that's a byproduct, obviously, in this manufacturing process. Produce a great deal of cheese, and they then produce a great deal of cheese whey. So typically it's concentrated, ultrafiltration, whatever, to end up with different fractions, whether it's whey protein fractions or side processes that come out of the reaction. So that's what nature does. So we start looking at what happens during those processes. We've, of course, got our casein, and so that's the major milk protein. And so we get proteases from the milk, but also the microorganisms are very important. We put these lactic acid bacteria in there. They start from breaking down that protein to some extent. The rennet also comes in and modifies that protein. So casein, major protein, we get that protein acted upon by, say, proteases, either indigenous in milk, come from the microorganisms, or added as the rennet that makes that milk hot. So we have polypeptides then, we get some breakdown, we attack the caseins. We have, again, more enzymes that come from our microorganisms. They will tend to break that protein down some more, break it down a little bit further. And so we end up with some peptides, some amino acids, so there's some portion of these materials that then tend to be very important to flavor. So they're proteolytic products. And so that can give us a good deal of the cheese flavor. At the same time, so we got one pathway generating flavor. Our other pathway within the milk or the cheese making process, there are lipases in milk. There's also lipases that are brought from microorganisms, so the lactic acid bacteria. And in some cases, enzymes could be added to that milk that we're using to make cheese. And as we look at all these lipases, what do lipases do? They chop off the fatty acids. So we've got free fatty acids that go into contributing to flavor. So as we look at what nature does, it breaks down the protein, and so some peptides and amino acids that break down the fats to fatty acids. So these are the primary components that give us the typical cheese flavor. So that's our one side. So here's our protein being broken. It's our protein intact. How's that? And so that gets broken down into small amino acids, small peptides. So it's basically going through the process. And so this is what gives us flavor. The intact protein really doesn't have any flavor. It doesn't have flavor until it gets broken down into peptides or amino acids. And this is the lipolysis standpoint. So we got milk fat. And for some reason, or one reason or another, here's our triglyceride, so glycerol. And we'll, of course, have three fatty acids put on the side chain. For one reason or another, Cal tends to put some short chain fatty acids on this position. On the other end, it tend to be long chain. You get some combination to come off this. But basically, that's our triglyceride. We put that lipase enzymes with it, and we tend to break down. We tend to chop off a fatty acid or fatty acids. So we're left with diglyceride, and we're left with, of course, the free fatty acids. If we look at the fatty acid content of different cheeses, natural cheeses, the mozzarella, that's the white one right here. Mozzarella doesn't have much flavor. It's really pretty flavorless. If you get some really good mozzarella, it has some character to it, all right. But let's face it, it's not a Parmesan, it's not a Romano. It's a pretty mild cheese. And you look at the free fatty acids, very little butyric acid, little C6, a little bit C8, a little more C10. Oops, yeah, a little more C10, not much here. But you notice that there's really a different proportion of fatty acids. If you look at milk, none of these patterns follow what's truly in milk. Milk has a very different fatty acid profile. But each of these lipases for microorganisms are specific. Well, they like to chop off these, they like to chop off them. So the starter cultures really control what blend of free fatty acids you have. So milk is always very much the same. It varies a little bit, but not a great deal. So the fatty acid profile. So what really controls what is given off the fatty acids and the proportion of them is, again, the starter culture that we use in the lipase from the starter culture. Look at provolone. Provolone's got a little more flavor, Parmesan a little bit more. Here's a Romano. Look at the free fatty acids on that. Very high levels of free fatty acids. So that's where Romano gets its flavors. It's from all these free fatty acids. Cheddar's kind of, here, fatty acids, but not a great deal. When you get up into this range also, you don't have much in the way of flavor to them. They don't really contribute much anything to aroma and much to taste. So these are the ones, the C4 to the C12. C12 to C4 are what do give you the flavor. So the flavor of that cheese is determined to a large extent by the profile of these C4 to C12 fatty acids. And so what do we do, of course? How do we look at these? And so we can look at how we modify our cheeses, how we modify our products to give more flavor to them. And these are the 5 categories of high intensity flavors. So let's say enzyme modified cheeses. So we can do very simple fermentation. That's what First Choice did, right? They produced a heck of a lot of diacetyl. And diacetyl, like the same, people think it is butter. So by fermentation, they can get a lot of diacetyl. And so taking milk, fermenting it, we can do a distillate that has a good deal of flavor. We can actually go ahead and take a dairy product itself, and let's mess around with enzymes. Let's start looking at nature. Let's look all over wherever we can find the enzymes that are going to be put in the milk. What kind of pattern does it give us? What kind of flavor does it give us? Our whole goal is to have more of those free fatty acids, more of those peptides. How do we do that? Let's add some enzymes. So let's make cheese. Let's make it a 2-month-old or 4-month-old cheese, so a young cheese. And let's let those enzymes go to work and make it taste like an older cheese or more potent cheese. So we're going to just do enzyme modification. There are different levels of complexity too that can be added onto this. Enzyme modified dairy products with other natural flavors, the EMDP, with other natural flavors. So now you're starting to look for other materials and nothing to do with dairy products made by a totally different route. But they fit, they'll go well. So okay, we're going to put other outside materials, nothing to do with dairy, but they fit. Dairy product reaction flavors. Now, how many of you people are fondue lovers? Everybody? One? Where's our Swiss? Come on. Fondue? Fondue? No? Okay. Okay. Well, if you eat fondue, you fight for that last piece of brown cheese at the bottom of the fondue pot. When all the cheese is gone, there's this brown circle of roasted cheese. And like I say, people fight for it. And what do you have? That's a reaction flavor, right? That cheese has been roasted or toasted at the bottom of the pot. And so, you want a roasted cheese or a crumble, something to put on top of a product, very flavorful. It's a nice flavor, toasted roasted cheese. So again, we can start, let's enhance these products. Let's make them much more intense reaction flavors. And of course, now you can put everything together. Let's add this, let's add that, and let's come up with something that's a complete, well-rounded flavor. So there's different levels of flavorings that you can look at and look towards making. And we'll go through those products a little bit. So a dairy fermentation, natural? No, right from the CFR, the federal regulations. Quotation marks, natural flavors produced by means of controlled fermentation of traditional dairy products usually followed by sequential processing to obtain increased flavor. Certain purity gives you a starter distillate. So that is defining basically what First Choice does. They do a fermentation, they distill that fermentation broth, and they end up with something called a starter distillate. And that has its place. Certainly a lot of baked goods. It's very common to use. I'm sure First Choice gave you lots of applications on this side of things. So, enzyme modified dairy products, high intensity dairy products, distinct flavors originate from controlled glycolytic or proteolytic enzyme action. And you can actually start with milk, cream, butters, butter fats, or cheeses. So, I said Katie, you're working enzyme modified cheeses. You just be working enzyme modified creams because cream is really bland flavor, right? It really helps to have a little bit of oomph that cream. So it's expensive. Let's modify cream. Let's modify butter, whatever. So when we talk about enzyme modified cheeses, that's not the only product. All of these products can be available or are available in enzyme modified form. And so again, lactic acid culture and then as a fermentation, typically followed by enzymatic action. And this is the enzyme modified dairy products, I'll say it yet, with other natural flavors. So one or more enzyme modified dairy products combined with other natural flavors. So again, you can do different things with that. I don't mess around with my cheese. I don't put berries in my beer. I don't put things in my coffee. Coffee's coffee, cheese is cheese. So I don't do well with this, but this could be a wine cheese. So you've got streams of wine or waves of wine going through the cheese. Some other flavors that maybe some people enjoy. How's that? And okay, dairy product reaction. Like I said, let's change that to processed flavors. That's more socially acceptable, it seems. And so again, that's where you're going to not do it in the bottom of the fondue pot, not going to be roasting your cheese in the oven. Somebody's going to make that for you. You're going to make it, they're going to grind it, and you're going to buy it and use it as an ingredient. So you go ahead and do your cheese processing, whatever you want, and then it's going to be thermally processed, roasted, heated, whatever, to give you this cooked roasted dairy flavor. Complete, okay, here we're doing high-fat intensity cream, butter, milk, made with these, added to an unflavored product. So we're going to get actually a finished product that's been formulated from these ingredients. One or more fermentation products, enzyme dairy, modified dairy products. So basically, someone's tailor making the blend that you want for your product. So what dairy notes do you want in your product? So again, that's formulated by a flavor company. So we get the notes completely. Enzyme modified dairy products. Basically, pretty much what we've really gone through. Enzyme modified dairy products, high intensity products, controlled lipase, yep. Lists free fatty acids, yep. Amount, nature, flavor compounds determined by the dairy product, the enzyme source, processing conditions. Not too profound. That's basically what we said. There's something going to add an enzymes, and let them go to work. Again, it's the short chain fatty acids that I mentioned already. So milk fat and dairy product. Good at chopping off some of those free fatty acids. This is, I believe, the composition. Yeah, this is the composition of milk itself. And so I actually should put that with the other slide where I got the cheeses. They should be up so you can compare them. So this is what's on the triglyceride, which is really different than what I showed you before for the cheeses. So for the cheeses, enzyme modified cheeses, we want some that are very high in some of these, because these are the flavorful ones. This is what gives you the cheese flavor. So let's get enzymes that tend to attack these and give us these. They don't give us anything. So we look for enzymes that have a preference for producing these free fatty acids. We can also start with cultured dairy products. So we can start with milk, we can start with cheese, but we can also start with a dairy product that's been fermented. So we can start with unfermented dairy products, such as milk, or I guess we call it cheese fermented in that sense. But we can also then do a cultured first, or fermentation first. So we could make a buttermilk, and let's add enzymes to the buttermilk to bring it more flavor. Let's go ahead and do something along those lines. So we use a combination of fermentation first, and then put our enzymes into it. So we can either start with a regular milk, or we could use a fermented milk. The generic process of making enzyme-modified dairy products, they can be sold as paste, or they can be spray-dried powders. So if you look at an enzyme-modified dairy product, produced from cream, for example, or wheat. Wait, how about whey? Okay, cream or whey, lipases. If they come from animal sources, and traditionally that's where they did come from. All of your lipases came from animal sources. But now, of course, microbial sources are much more efficient and much more opportunity for changes. But pig, goat, cat, lamb, basically pre-gastric esterases. So these are what were traditional. We've done much more to microbial sources for cost and control. So it's in my case, so it is literally a paste. They do require refrigeration. They need to be preserved in that sense, so you make your product into a paste, refrigerated paste. You can go ahead and spray dry them, and then you start off with the paste, add a little more water to it, make it pumpable, make it sprayable, and then you have a powder, a cheese powder. How's that? Again, I went through how we make a cheese. Basically, these are the steps that go through for cream. Standardize it, you write fat content, heat pasteurize, add your enzymes, heat and activate, and that's an absolutely important step. When you make these products, in the end, after you've gone through this enzyme process, you really want to inactivate that enzyme, because those are livable enzymes. And maybe they've kind of gone as far as they want to in this product. But when you take this product, put it into your product, those enzymes are still there, and then go after your product And they will give you things that maybe aren't so nice or aren't so interesting. So you kind of go through this process, or cream or fermented cream or whatever you want. Go through the process, you add your enzymes, but you then heat and activate it, homogenize it, and that's the finished product. And that's just the kind of the pathway off to the side. So you start with cream, go through it, or do you go and ferment the cream and come down this pathway? So they're really analogous to cheeses, the same kind of idea. And what do you get out of it? It's an enzyme-modified cultured cream. That's what you would buy it as. So it either be the cultured side or the non-cultured side. Again, this is pretty much what we showed earlier. The idea that for looking at protease, enzyme, lipase treatment, that basically comes out of our pathway. That's redundant. So basically the same thing. Take our caseins, chop them up, take your milk fat, do some hydrolysis. So commercially available enzyme-modified cheeses also sold in a paste or a spray-dried powder. That's really the same thing. They'll always be using lipases for important. We should have something in place here. Maybe be coming up about proteolytic enzymes too. So one category of these are just using lipases, but we'll see another category where proteases get put in too. Because that's basically what you get in normal cheese. You break it down proteins and you break it down the lipids. So if you want to get everything, you're going to have both enzyme systems present. Here we go. And so it's the same kind of process. The cheese is supposed to move over there. Grind the cheese, grind the cheese, add water and emulsifiers to make a nice cheese slurry. Pasteurize. You want to make sure you get organisms out of there, or at least not active organisms anymore. Then you can add your lipase and or proteases and react with 24 hours or more at 30 degrees or above. It can't be too hot. You need to denature your protease and your lipase. So you allow these to act as long as you want to develop the flavor you want. Heat and activate the added enzymes. So let's inactivate those enzymes. And then you can do some homogenization. You can do whatever you want with it and basically make either a powder or a paste again. And this is something that could go on the surface of chips, snack foods, in making up sauces, mac and cheese. Go ahead and take your pick of these. The keys really to enzyme-modified cheeses are enzymes and getting the right enzymes in the right environment. There's little information on this publicly available. I was actually dumbfounded how little the companies know about what they're doing with these things, in the sense that it's typically an art. It's historically been an art. They found that if they add this enzyme and they let it go this length of time, it makes something they want, but they don't necessarily know what's happened to it or why it's gone that direction. He's having fun of working with a company to try to figure out what these enzymes do, and that's about the first such study that I'm aware of. Historically, it's been hard. One of my PhD students had to do military service in France, and there's an alternative to military service, and that's to work in a third world country and help doing some research and help in development. And so he chose to work here in the U.S., which I thought was good on his part. And he went to an enzyme-modified cheese company. He came back and he said, those people don't have any idea what they're doing. They just put these enzymes in, they try them, if they work, they're happy. If they don't, they don't. And I just found it hard to believe it. Nobody's ever really looked at that whole process. Well, we're going to do one more thing before we call it quits. So you should have had this one. I think I got them all to you. And my goal is to tell you or give you some appreciation for why flavors are probably the most expensive ingredient that the company buys. It's interesting how much pressure oftentimes accounting, purchasing, whoever put on flavor companies to try and get the price down. It isn't as though they're expensive per unit of product. You know, you don't spend a whole lot per can or package of product in the end for the flavoring, but it is a big single item. So when you buy it, they're expensive, and that makes it count. But the purchasing people say, "Can we get something cheaper?" Even though the cost per carton is pretty darn reasonable. So anyway, what makes how do we determine the cost of our flavoring? What's the basis of that? And so if you kind of look at where cost comes from in the flavor that you buy, certainly there's a cost of creation. You don't pay it up front. It isn't with General Mills, Cargill, or whoever. If they want to have flavor for their product, they go to a flavor company and say, "This is what I want, make it for me." And the company doesn't pay the flavor company anything for their time and their effort. If they don't buy that flavor, the flavor company just lost that time and money. And so the only time you get to recover the creation of costs is when you're successful selling that product to the company. Then you get the money back, and you hope they stay with you for a certain amount of time, instead of going out and saying, "Can someone give it to me cheaper? I've got a good one now." So it's an interesting one, but there are costs of creation. Somebody has to pay these people, and the flavor people aren't paid well. So that has to get one way getting made up for in this whole process. Obviously, you have to pay for the raw materials that you're using to create the flavor. You're going to be not delivering pure flavor chemicals to anybody. You're going to deliver them in a powder, diluted in a maltodextrin, gummification, something, or they're going to be in a solvent, propylene glycol, ethanol, whatever. So there's going to be some kind of flavor diluent, that's also expensive. Legislation, you might say, why is that a cost? Well, because the food company is going to want to know how I can label this product, and they want to know that everything in it happens to be natural or whatever they want. And so someone has to be up on the regulations for everything that's done with that flavor, everything that's relevant to that flavor. So a company has to be up on regulations and every material that's used. Where does it fit into regulations? And if they're a global company, they got to know what the rules are in Japan, what they're in France, what they are in the US, what they're in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, take your pick. And that's costly because there isn't a uniform law regulations across the globe. They're similar in many ways, but they're different in many ways also. So you have to have people, and somebody has to pay their salary. Technological cost, well, maybe you're going ahead and developing a product, and it takes some research to come up with that product. Okay, so let's go ahead and what do we pay for development there of the technology and the production? What's the production scale? Are you buying 100 pounds a year? Or are you buying 100 pounds per hour? So, obviously, buying things in quantity is cheaper. Once you get a process going, it's cheaper to have it. Quality assurance, and I'm going to go through these probably in another sense. Quality assurance, somebody has to guarantee that you're getting what you expect you're getting, and it's the quality you expect. So you have to have a quality assurance group that tax on their costs. Packaging, transport, and packaging and transport are getting to be expensive. If you're using alcohol as a solvent, you're now handling a flammable, combustible product. That requires special transport, special handling. And alcohol is very commonly used as a solvent. So flammable, hazardous material. And somewhere in there is service too. And again, what kind of service are you giving to the food company? how are you helping that company? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these in a little more detail. So those are kind of the things that we introduced. Matching development with need. And so, do you want something that's sophisticated? Do you want a complicated flavor, a well-rounded flavor, beautiful flavor? Or you do something that just meets the needs of who you think is going to buy that? And really, a nice example of that are lemon drops. You know, that lemon drops that you buy, they don't have much in terms of flavor there. There may be some lemon oil, it may just be citral, it comes from lemongrass, maybe some yellow food coloring. Okay, you're not going to put an expensive flavor into that product. You need to sell them for as cheap as you can. So basically this says, don't make higher recommendations, don't make that flavor, demand more of that flavor in terms of quality, then you're going to get out of selling your product. So if you can get by with some artificial citral, some artificial yellow, wonderful. Don't tell me you want, the best flavor, lemon flavor that ever existed. So make sure that person's asking for what you need, not something extra. Can an existing flavor be made? Every flavor company has a nice library of chemical flavorings on hand. They'll have many of them on their shelf, samples. If you were a customer and you don't come too often, I think I'll just go ahead and would you like to try this flavor, this flavor, this flavor, this flavor? You pull them off the shelf. Sorry, we're not going to do this for you. Maybe next time. So do you have to put somebody into creation and spend days on creating something, or will you accept something that you've already developed and you have the formula, here it is? So again, this is really gets into the time and money aspect of it. How much effort will I have to put in development of a new flavor? And if you don't have to put money in there, it's cheaper. Matching competitive product. Me too. I want you to deliver what this other company is delivering to me. Oh, I'd like it cheaper too, by the way. Okay? So I won't say flavor, but I want it cheaper. And you might say that people with their wonderful gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, then it should be simple. I'm going to give you this flavor, now duplicate it for me, and I'll sell it to you cheaper. So you go to a competitor, right? You're buying a Givaudan flavor, and IFF says, oh no, we can match that. Would you match it? And so it's not easy to do. Analytical time, there's nuance in it. Very commonly, some nice components will be put in that are complex mixtures, complex blends. Sometimes the key compound that really makes it is way below the sensory threshold of your machine, or I should say, the detection limits of your machine. And so, this is not an easy task. It is not an easy task to duplicate somebody else's. You may determine, and this is a case, there was a compound that a company was buying that made the cocoa flavor just really ideal. Buying that chemical was what made my cocoa flavor wonderful. But I could get it cheaper from another company. And so I got it from them, but guess what? It was the same chemical, but there was impurities in one that gave it a nuance that made it unique. How do you deal with those things? No, my gas chromatography says it's this compound. Oh, good, we'll buy it and put it in. But it's not that. It's nuances that come with it. So you could really have some challenges along these lines, is trying to do a me too, trying to match something. Flavor composition, okay. Flavor performance, so the blend that you put together, you give some thoughts to this, what you need along these lines. Key character impact compounds, are they expensive? Aren't they expensive? We'll get into it. Are they natural? Aren't they natural? Are they GMO? Aren't they? And so on each of these things add. But what do we need for your impact compounds? How expensive are those compounds? Again, you're going to be putting in many of the components to round out or balance that flavor. That's going to be in some kind of a solvent. Okay, how expensive is that solvent? It's probably glycol, is it ethanol? Oh, if I'm making it ethanol, everybody loves ethanol. now I have to pay tax on that. The flavor company has to pay tax on every gallon of ethanol that comes into the plant. They pay it as if it's the finest bourbon in the world. And they have to then account for it not being edible on the way out. And if they can prove that this is not edible, okay, they get their tax money back. But guess what? You've got ethanol on your plant. It has to be under lock and key. You've got to have somebody keeping track of its inventory, who's in there, who isn't in there, it's flammable, and all these things start certainly adding up. So I have to put on things there. Do I need antioxidants? Do I need quality agents? Do I need colors? Do I need emulsify? So what is in that flavor? And every one of those things you add adds costs to that product. And generally, and I think it's still the way it's done, is that the final cost of the product is based on the ingredient cost. And so we'll take the ingredient cost and multiply it by 3, by 5, 10, whatever they can. And so the idea of those raw materials and what you pay for them does determine the finished price. And so you keep it simple as best you can. And this is again looking at kind of the cost of ingredients. And so what do you want? What kind of character do you want? And so let's say we want some ethyl propionate, rum, sweet, raisin type character to your flavor. That's only $4.30 a kilo. So that's a pretty cheap component. I can get by with some of these, $4 a kilo, $4 a kilo. Isobutyrate, you were getting a little more expensive, so now it's $15 a kilo. And so what does your flavor formulate from? Is it a fairly simple, cheap formulation that uses this type of cost? Or are we looking at a much higher cost? So again, your formulation depends obviously upon what you're using, what chemicals you're using. More sophistication, the more cost comes. Important flavor modifiers. Okay, so maybe you got your fruit flavor in this last table, but let's give it a little bit of fresh character, a little bit of green character, a little bit of on-ripe character. Well, now it's not $3.60, it's not $15 a kilo. Putting these components in to give it these notes, it's now costing me $71 a kilo for those components. Perennial, a sweet, ripe, cooked caramel note to my flavor, $143 a kilo. Maltol, sweet, creamy caramel, $64. So I can start with a very simple, here's my fruit flavor. Oh, you want this newest fruit? Well, that's okay. That's okay. We can do that at $143 addition. Well, obviously it's used in some proportion, but you're starting to add expensive ingredients to the formulation. And you kind of look at some things like, oh man, you want it kosher, you want it natural from the named product, you want whatever, ethyl butyrate. So you want ethyl butyrate artificial, that's $3.60 a kilogram. You want it kosher certified, that's $27 a kilo. You want it produced by some nice biotech process, it's $95 a kilo. You want it from the named fruit. And there's an advantage to that in your labeling. You could just say orange. You don't have to say orange flavored. These are components from orange, for example. And so from a label standpoint, it's attractive to have things come from the name flavor, the name component. Well, what happened to my cost? Now it's $1,000 a kilo for that component. And my price is going up. You decide, well, okay, I'm going to do it